Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy, at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 291. If you're a job seeker right now, are you getting ghosted? Are your requests for information and status updates on a job application or the outcome of an interview being met with no response? Maybe that's not you, but you've heard the stories of people who have had that happen. My hope that regardless of which of those categories you fall into, that this discussion can be a dose of perspective, advice, and some encouragement, because this week we're continuing our discussion on the topic of layoffs in the tech industry with special guests Kat Nelson-Troyer and Liz Bronson from the Real Job Talk podcast. If you missed part 1 of our discussion with Kat and Liz in episode 290, it's well worth the listen. We talked through initial thoughts on the layoff trends in technology, and we shared a lot of advice on what you can do if you're someone who's been impacted by a layoff situation. We also talked about how to process losing a colleague and how we might support colleagues who have been impacted by layoffs. This week in part 2 of our discussion, you'll hear perspectives on what it's like out in the job market right now for those looking for work. We'll talk about employee experience and how the current job market is impacting that. And we'll also try to provide some advice for the people leaders out there. What advice do we have for them to keep going through these challenging situations that may not have been their choice in the first place? This episode, just like last week, has plenty of free resources. We'll make sure all those links are in the show notes and talk about them in the outro. Here we go with part 2 of our discussion with Kat and Liz from Real Job Talk, all focused on layoffs. Go back for just a second to Liz, your mention of the job market being weird right now.
Mm-hmm.
Do we think that will level off and calm itself a little bit more, even if these events keep happening, this rightsizing exercise, these layoffs in the industry? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I have lots of thoughts. Do you have ours? And I'm talking to a lot of job seekers. I'm talking to a lot of recruiters. I'm talking to a lot of people out there. We've got a lot of disgruntled employees. We've got people on the market. We have people opening up jobs on all these different platforms, and they're getting thousands of applicants. Thousands of those thousands are not qualified. And so you post a job, you get 3,000 applicants. Nobody has time to go through them, so they sit there. Wait, what? You have 3,000 people sitting there, but you're going out because it's so overwhelming. So there's ghosting happening. I mean, my stories have stories. I talked to someone who had gone through 3 rounds, done a 7-hour sit-down interview in person, and then never heard back. Like, this stuff is happening. That was not an anomaly. Like, this is happening all over. So what has happened, in my opinion, is any kind of recession, rightsizing, what you see first is the recruiters get cut because hiring stops, so you cut that cost. So recruiters were all out of work. And then hiring slowed down, and so all the recruiters have flooded the market, but any hiring that was happening was being done by anemic teams. And then you have the tools popping up that are putting these jobs everywhere. You've got networking groups putting these jobs anywhere. So you've got thousands and thousands of applicants. You're way overworked. You can't get back to people. There's AI tools, but they're unreliable and sometimes goofy. So they haven't been perfected yet, or they haven't been onboarded and installed and trained and all those things yet. So we're just in this weird spot. And a well-run recruiting program the recruiters don't have more than 10 jobs on their plate, and you're hearing about people with 50. They can't do 50 jobs well. So they're doing the best they can. But then you've got all the traditional hiring managers didn't get back. They're overwhelmed because they had to cut their team in half and now they get one new rec, but they don't have time to hire. The list goes on and on and on. So the process has just gotten out of control, and job seekers are feeling it and getting more frustrated. Our tools and our people and our processes haven't kept up with the times, and a lot of recruiters now have gotten jobs back. So what we saw at the end of last year were a lot of recruiter openings, which is a great sign because that means the economy's coming back, right? So you saw a lot of recruiter openings, but those people are all ramping up and they're getting onboarded. And so it's all just catching up. But what we're seeing out there is the best way to get in is referrals. And also, I had someone tell me a story. She applied for a job, emailed the hiring manager, and then 2 days later, the hiring manager was like, I'm so glad we have so much interest in the role. I've had 3,000 applicants and 600 people reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm going to try to get through everything, but I can't get back to all of you. Think about that. So when I'm sitting there, screaming vulnerably into the wind, emailing CEOs or chief people officers or whatever, they're probably getting 400, 500 emails just like mine. So I have to figure out another way. That's just a little glimpse into what is going on, at least for people I've been talking to. Most applications, you don't even get a rejection these days.
There's something there about company reputation. I don't think that as a society, we hold organizations accountable enough for the applicant experience. Somehow, the applicant experience is expected to be judged completely separately from the employee experience. Instead of, the way that you treat these applicants is indicative of the way that I expect to be treated as an employee, which 100%. I think would be logical. You don't get back to people, like everybody's overworked. Well, if I have a ticket for, it doesn't matter what, I'm probably going to get treated that exact same way. So maybe that's a company that I don't want to work for. But there's not enough of, maybe there's not a central place for people to report that.
Yes, there is. Glassdoor. It's all on Glassdoor and stuff like that, and Reddit. But I will tell you, in my view, and Kat, jump in here, but like employee experience starts at the application and it ends when you're in the alumni network. And you have to think it through. And when times are good and money's flowing, you see investment in the employee experience. When it's hard to get good people, all of a sudden you see an investment in the application, in the recruiting process. When it's not as hard, all that goes away because you're trying to do more with less and all the things. It's goofy out there right now. Nick, you picked up on it. It's goofy out there. But John, you're right. It's like, if you're ghosting me, I don't want to work for you. That's not nice. We've had multiple conversations and you're ghosting? Well, thanks. And I'm asking you, because every person who's held recruiting has ghosted someone because they're waiting to hear back and they forgot about them. But I promise you, any candidate that ever said, hey, have you heard back? Got a response. A recruiter can have 50 to 100 candidates on their plate easy at any given time. So there's some grace that has to be given, but it's the ones that stop responding to people saying, hey, any news? That's the stuff that starts to get really, really employee experience based.
Even in a no, I just need to know that it's no.
Yeah.
So I can move on emotionally.
A no is much better than no answer.
For sure. Yeah. It's cool. Go, good luck. But to just ignore is wild. And I hear this from people every day.
We've had so many conversations about this over the years. The way some people navigate. It's unfortunate, and it does make the process, I think, more challenging for the applicant when there isn't the communication that you would expect, especially if you've gone to an interview in person and then they don't loop back. My advice is try, as much as possible, try not to take that personally because you're probably not the only person that's getting ghosted.
Well, Kat, maybe we can pivot to a discussion about the responsibility for employee experience there. Is there a lesson to be learned from, the people leaders about the focus on applicant experience and how it is not actually separate from employee experience? Like it's the beginning of the employee experience, and it's a reputational risk if the organization isn't handling that correctly. Yeah, I mean, that's not even like a first line
100%.
manager problem, right? That's a kind of a global leadership issue.
It goes all the way up. There's validity in everything Liz said about people being bogged down with work right now and just having too much on their plate to be able to do their job effectively. There's that, and that is true. But there are also people who are serial ghosters, regardless of how busy they are. And when I know that about someone, that's really good information for me to know, because I'm probably going to bypass an opportunity with them because communication is important to me. It's a very strong value. Even if it's an uncomfortable conversation, right? If it's uncomfortable, I know uncomfortable conversations are never fun, but I sure respect people who are willing to have them as opposed to just ghosting.
We definitely have Glassdoor, but it's not granular, right? It's not this recruiter ghosted me, this hiring manager was rude, promised me an answer, never responded, even, with politely and appropriately spaced reminders. We don't have that level of accountability. And if we had it, then the reviews would be a product that could be sold back to the companies.
I do think that, just like we need to put time on our calendar to worry, we need to put time on our calendar to be good community citizens. And part of the responsibility that you have when you have an open rec, and I feel for that hiring manager who got 600 direct messages or whatever on LinkedIn, holy bananas. That's a lot. And by the way, you think recruiters aren't getting that? And these recruiters that I'm saying are already overworked. You think that's not adding to the whole shebang? But you got to have some time of thank you. Thanks for your interest. We're going through our process thing, and cut and paste it and just send it to each person. You've got to put time to be a good community member. And as all of us as networkers, right? And I keep going back to this, but as the job seeker who's screaming vulnerably into the wind and being like, hey, John, you're at a company I just applied to. Can you help? To not write back, it's tough. Everyone's going to be a job seeker at some point, and what goes around comes around. And again, I'm not complaining on my own behalf. I'm let's make this world a better place and this world a better community. And just to say hey, good luck to you. I can put in a good word. It takes a minute, right? And then if we all do that for each other and we all put, an hour a week in our calendar to be a good community member, that'll feel a lot better, I think, than ignoring folks that want some help. And it'll give us good energy when we need it next time. At least that's the hope.
There's a good segue into something I want to ask. How can the executive leader who has to make those cuts instill hope for the new company that has right-sized? Instill hope in the employees and motivate them to keep going?
Cuts without demoralizing, I guess, is the slug there, right?
Yeah. Well, hopefully that leader has a good strategy behind the process and has done a deep cut, as deep as necessary. The hardest thing on teams are when there's a layoff and then 2 months later and then 90 days later. Several strings of layoffs are rough. And, whenever I'm talking with a leader that needs to do that, it's do the deep cut now, because it's going to be you only have to manage the process once. And it's all about communication and expressing gratitude for the team members that left. And also, this is the new team and you're here for a reason. And really instilling that hope and building that trust and acknowledging that it's going to be different. And it is sad to see these people leave that have been our coworkers. I think that good leaders are good communicators and are able to communicate what they need to communicate with empathy. Those are the ones that I see people be loyal with.
So I could not agree more. I also think you leave a little space for the mourning period. I think you have a really strong plan forward. So part of planning a RIF is planning the repair. So you don't just plan up to the day of and then stop. You plan for the weeks and months after for the repair. You plan your communications. You plan to say, this is what we're going to do. This is our action plan moving forward. We don't want to do this again. This is how many months runway we have in the bank. This is where we're investing. This is what we're looking at for M&A because we realize we need this, whatever it is, right? And so it's clear communication. It's back to what we were saying about, okay, we've got a smaller team. Here are our priorities. This is what we're going to be doing. And not avoiding those uncomfortable conversations. That's part of leadership. You have to have them. And while you can't say, when someone comes in your office, like, why'd you get rid of Jane instead of Jim? You can't have that conversation. You can't engage in it. But what you can say is, I hear that you're really upset that Jane's gone. And while I can't discuss the details, I want you to know it's hard for me too. And this was a hard, hard decision. And I'll do anything I can to help Jane get her next role. That's what you can do. And it will be an elephant in the room unless you show the elephant the door. And the door is the path moving forward.
I think you have a really good point there, Liz, about being transparent as possible. There's appropriate transparency. And I think that I always advise leaders, unless there's liability, share the reasoning behind the strategy. Because when people understand the reasoning behind the strategy, it's much easier to get behind it. And also when you feel like someone is being transparent with you, or at least when I feel like someone is being transparent with me, I'm going to trust them a little bit more. Those are the qualities, that a good leader is, should be aware of and at least strive for. It's hard. I mean, it's hard for leaders in this kind of situation. It's not, it's never fun to have to navigate reduction of forces.
If someone is a leader and they're listening to this and they have had to do that once, maybe even more than once, what advice do we have for them to continue on being a leader? Because a lot of times they're just the executioner. Maybe it wasn't their call. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't their call on who goes, but they had to go and deliver that news. How can the leader who's had to do that keep their head up?
They have to take care of themselves. We're all people. It's hard. As a leader, the day of a RIF, it's hard. And you can't be in your feelings because you've got to be there for your team and for others. But you also go home and you have to take care of yourself because you have to show up as that transparent, open, honest, focused person who's positive and not Pollyanna positive, not like, it's going to be great now. Nope. It's going to be hard. And this is what we have to do. And these are big mountains and own it. It's hard, but you have to be that person that we're talking about. And then you have to make sure you're taking care of yourself so you're not burning yourself out so you can be strong enough to do the work.
It's tough, of course, to have, I think, empathy for the people who at the top of an organization are responsible for things. It feels like there's not really accountability. Like, oh, the C-suite engaged in bad strategy and now they're firing a bunch of people, but not taking a haircut in compensation or anything like that. So that's not really where the level where we as people towards the bottom have empathy. The empathy probably, if we're having it, lies for the people who have to carry out those actions, the front line, the people in human resources who have to go out and
each of us can think of that great leader that handled it well. All of us, when I say that, we all think of someone who stood up there and owned it, right? And what made them stand out. I think of in the early rounds of 2022, there was a letter that was circulated from the CEO of Stripe. And it was beautiful. And it was leadership. And they treated their people incredibly well because it's a unicorn. Let's be honest. They were able to, right? Not every startup could do what they did. But you heard from people who were laid off, who were full of gratitude for how they were treated. It was special. So there are ways to do it. And we can all think of leaders that have led well through hard times and change. And we can also think of the ones that closed their office door and hid.
If you're a leader having to navigate this and aren't sure exactly what to do, I think that this would be a really good time to consult with your personal board of advisors and to really think through the strategy as tightly as possible before you execute.
100%. I mean, I'm not a people manager. John, I know you are. So I'd imagine that's some solid advice for anyone who has to do something that's difficult.
I think it goes back to something that I meant to say during our initial layoff discussion is, if you are ever involved in a RIF, like that's when you suddenly realize all the steps that you haven't taken to build your network, to keep in touch with people. And I'm sure that all frontline managers, who have to execute something like this, like a, reduction in force, a RIF, probably realize all of a sudden, oh, wait, I don't have my advisory committee on how to do this in the most humane and, way possible and then manage the team in the most positive way possible, right?
But that's where you go to HR. That's where you get a coach like Kat. That's where you invest some time and ask questions of whomever is a person around you that can help, because you take on the personal responsibility of doing it right.
Yeah, I guess leaders have to take ownership at their level, and that makes sense. And part of that is, owning the fact that maybe you weren't ready to do this and don't know exactly how to handle it. It's not every first or second line manager that's had to manage through a RIF. It's sadly becoming more common, but it's not everybody.
It's not in the job description as a requirement to get the job, is it?
No.
Experience with RIFs preferred.
That's a red flag.
Could you imagine reading
Talk
that?
about a red flag.
Again, that's where I would say you find out you're going to be doing a RIF. You find out you're going to be letting people go. Make a meeting with your HR person that day. You wave the flag and say, hey, wait a minute, I need help with this. I need coaching here. An HR team should have that as part of the plan of who's going to be doing things and what they're going to be saying and all the stuff. And usually there's a script and everything else and instructions, but you got to make sure you've got the training you need.
Yeah. There are places you can go for help, and HR isn't always the bearer of bad news. They're there to help the organization. They're there to help the people. So they're a good resource that we can tap as well. I know we're getting close to time here, ladies. So as we land the plane, any final thoughts on this topic that you want to encourage listeners to take to heart? Maybe Kat, we'll start with you.
If a RIF happens to you, it may feel like it's the end of the world at the moment, but you are going to get through it. And so take time to process your emotions and then get started on figuring out what your next step is going to be. We have a lot of resources on the Real Job Talk website, which is realjobtalk.com. There's a resource page. We've got that must-have list, which is one of the first things on that resource page, which is a good process to go through to help you to get clear. Now, that must-have list is the second piece of that envisioning process. What I do with my private clients is I ask them to think big and to think about if they could write their own job description, what would that look like? So I call it the ideal job process. And then we take that piece of paper, right, with all that data, and then we come up with the must-have list from there. But the must-have list is on our website, and we have a bunch of episodes on how to navigate interviews, how to negotiate job offers, just, how to navigate challenging situations at work. So check out our podcast if you haven't listened to it before.
How about you, Liz? Closing thoughts.
I agree with everything Kat said, but I'd like to add something that I learned early in my career that is invaluable. You can only control yourself. You can't control what you can't control. So while, yes, you can be aware and look at the balance sheet and all those other things, the best hedge against a RIF is doing your best. After that, it's not in your hands. So stressing and worrying and getting yourself in knots over something that you really don't have control over, because we all know great people who have had their jobs eliminated, it doesn't serve you. And so think about and focus on the things you can control. Have a plan. As the person who I used to call myself the shoemaker with no shoes, that I was the, career coach with no resume. have a resume, make sure it's up to date, like do the things that you can control. Maybe ask some people for recommendations on LinkedIn to beef up your LinkedIn or whatever. Those are things you can control. You cannot control your company's future single-handedly. So try not to sit there and worry and focus on moving yourself, your group, your team forward. That's the best thing you can do.
Yes, it is. And the next best thing you can do is make sure and subscribe to Real Job Talk.
100%.
Listen, we want to thank you ladies for coming on the show and sharing your thoughts with us. We look forward to seeing your progress, listening to your episodes, and perhaps we'll follow up with you again on a different topic in the future.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Even though it's a challenging conversation, we had a good time with you guys talking about it.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate you.
Just like we wouldn't take a job and expect to be impacted by a layoff or reduction in force, it is highly likely the people leader doesn't take their job as a people leader and expect to have to execute a layoff. But I would say that if you are someone who's considering a role as a people leader, it might just be one of those things where you have to set the expectation for yourself that you may need to learn how to do that because it may happen to the specific company where you work. So did you subscribe to Real Job Talk? And don't forget to check out their resources page, which includes the must-have list that Kat and Liz were talking about that we can each go through on our own. It's a great exercise. And a lot of episode links of shows that they've recorded that can help all of us. Remember also that if you are someone who's been impacted by a layoff, Al and Leanne Elliott, the hosts of the Truth, Lies, and Workplace Culture podcast, do offer a free career coaching session for anyone in that boat. We'll put the link in the show notes to take advantage of that if you'd like to. So if you're searching for a job right now, I would encourage you to go back to our Nerd Journey Foundation series, starting with a discussion of resumes in episode 203. We talk about job search in episode 204. We talk about the interview process in episode 205 and 206. And then there's also Secrets of a LinkedIn Expert with Louise Bunyan, episode 164, with some great tips on how to tweak your LinkedIn profile to get more attention. And if you want more advice related to layoffs or you want to hear more stories of people who have been through this, I would point you to the following episodes. Episode 237, The Psychological Transition of Layoffs with Leanne Elliott, a business psychologist, by the way, and co-host of the Truth, Lies, Workplace Culture podcast. In that episode, there are links to many other stories of people who have been laid off and what they did as a result of that. But within that discussion, Leanne talks about a framework called Vitals that you can use to kind of figure out what you want to do next. Pair that up with the must-have list and some of the advice that Kat and Liz were giving. And I think that's a very nice, well-rounded set of frameworks for thinking about what you might want to do next. Episode 268, Ownership Through Failures, an entrepreneur's take on difficult decisions with Eric Gross. We have a really interesting discussion on layoffs from 3 different perspectives that I think will be helpful to you. And then episode 280, Life After Layoff, a Leader's Sense of Duty, and a series of good conversations with Marnie Coffey. Marnie shares her semi-recent story about layoff, what happened next, and how she demonstrated leadership all the way to the end. You can also check out the layoff tag on our website, which should pull up any episode that talks about the topic of layoffs. I really appreciate Kat and Liz taking the time to be part of these discussions with us. I know it was a difficult topic, and it's hard to see out there in our industry. So I hope that these were encouraging to you. I hope they provide practical tips for you to take advantage of, regardless of which category you fall into today. If you enjoyed these discussions, please take the time to rate us 5 stars and write a review and share what you liked about the show and what you'd like to hear more of. We'll see you next time.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.